Alright, so the first season of Marvel's What If series has concluded, and while I haven't talked about any of the other Disney Plus MCU content here on my channel, I was asked specifically to talk about this one, and if I was going to talk about any of them, it was going to be this one. As while I have enjoyed the other Disney Plus Marvel shows, some more than others, all of them felt like, regardless of what the show was trying to do, somebody somewhere had given the production crews an endpoint that they had to reach. Regardless of what else happened in the story, they had to get to a specific point, and therefore I felt like we're talking about WandaVision, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Loki here, I feel like their endings all kind of petered out. Cap and Bucky's far less than the others, in my opinion. But What If, because it deals with, it's unclear whether it's literally other universes or just other timelines within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but because it deals with, let's say, realities that don't directly affect the MCU that we've seen in the movies, you get the sense that they were allowed to do way more with it, even with the ending. Though, other YouTubers have talked about this too, and I definitely agree, it feels like they did have to make some compromises regarding their ending, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So, while the other Disney Plus MCU shows definitely feel like the weekly story comics or monthly story comics in between the big event comics in this analogy being the movies, What If feels like its own thing. And I feel like it's just generally, like, you can assume that it's going to be more enjoyable as a whole because of that. And I know this isn't everyone's opinion, but it's just mine. But just to very briefly go over my thoughts on those other shows that I mentioned. WandaVision was really great, though I thought the ending could have been significantly stronger, but as it seems to be leading directly into Multiverse of Madness, I imagine that'll pick things up and get it going again for a possible season 2 or a continuation of the story elsewhere. Loki was fine. I genuinely think that if they were going to go for a Loki on Loki romance, it should have been with another male Loki, especially since this is the one where they confirmed that MCU Loki is bisexual. But I understand that wouldn't have really been appealing to as broad an audience as possible, and this is still a Disney property. They still want to get it to as many people as possible. Just, man, show Loki kissing a dude, you cowards. Still, it was an enjoyable show, and the ending hook on this one probably intrigued me more than any of the ending hooks on any of these 3 series. Just, man, I thought all the stuff with the guy in the castle at the end, I cannot remember what he called himself, but he's a version of Kang the Conqueror, felt very convoluted. More so than I think they intended it to. And there were times when I just genuinely did not buy the dialogue between Loki and Sylvie. At all. And then Captain America and the Winter Soldier, which is what I'm going to call it, because that is the final title for the show as of the ending credits of the final episode, is, I think, the best of the bunch. And this is the one where they had to excise an entire plot about a global pandemic because of the global pandemic and not wanting to be insensitive. And I still felt like it was the best of the bunch. I really love Falcon, but now Captain America. I think Bucky's pretty cool too. I have a soft spot for any story with U.S. Agent as the sort of bad Captain America. I think he has a cool design and adds an interesting dynamic to a good Cap story. I liked that it touched on racial stuff. I wish it had touched on it more, but I liked that it did it all. And Sam's speech at the end of the season was fantastic. It has me extremely excited, not just for some of the more intriguey stuff on the more human side of the MCU going forward, but to see this new Captain America in his own solo movie, which is coming. Very excited about that. Though please, could somebody just confirm, somebody with Marvel, can you confirm whether or not Steve is alive? It's bumming me out that we still don't technically know for sure. But yeah, I think they're all good shows. WandaVision, up until its ending started to peter out and it was clear that they cut out some of the twists that they had intended to include, probably has the strongest individual episodes. It's just the way that they resolve some of the twists. It bummed me out. Cap and Winter Soldier is the strongest overall, and Loki has some really great moments and a lot of potential. But we're here to talk about What If, an anthology series that can be something different every week. And though they did decide to give it an overarching plot, technically speaking, it still works as that. But due to the nature of the show, not everyone is going to like every episode of it. These episodes are not made for as broad an audience as possible, each of them. They're made for specific audiences. You're supposed to check in each week, try out the episode, and then afterwards, after watching a few, discuss which ones you personally liked and which ones you personally didn't feel that attached to. And frankly, I'd like to see more stuff like this in the Disney Plus MCU stuff. Stuff that doesn't feel as constrained by the movies. My hope is that we will get to a point where these Disney Plus episodes don't just feel kind of like the regular issues of a comic series leading up to an event, but that they actually do serve that same purpose in the MCU, where the event might dictate some of the stuff that has to happen in the series, but the event will have to accommodate the stuff that happens in the series too. They'll have to work with each other and create a more complex and varied tapestry. Like, the MCU isn't perfect. There's a lot to criticize about it. And I do consider it sort of a guilty pleasure of mine. Like, it's not high art, and I understand that. But it could definitely be more complex and interesting than it is. But because What If is an anthology series, and because the overarching story of it doesn't pick up until basically the very end, I do kind of have to give my 2 cents on each of these individual episodes separately. So I'm gonna try to blast my way through that as fast as possible. The first episode of What If is still probably my personal favorite of the bunch, though there's another one that gives it a run for its money. I really like multiverse stories, I really like alternate reality stories, and in particular, I really like when those stories have a clear cause and effect, where it's very obvious what the one instigating change was, and where each additional change happens to cause the cascading differences that we see throughout the story. And while you can infer some of the cascade of changes in some of these other episodes, this is really the only one that shows us, not literally all of them, but a majority of them, as the story progresses, as it covers the events of Captain America the First Avenger, but literally, what if Captain Carter got the serum instead? Peggy as, not Captain America, but her universe's equivalent, is absolutely spectacular, and they're able to show us some stuff, some angles of the action that we never could have gotten in the movies, simply because animation is a more flexible medium. The dynamic between Steve and Peggy is still on point in the story, and I liked the concepts that they brought in that were a little more high concept, the kind of stuff that you might see if First Avenger were made in the MCU now, like the Hydra Stomper, Steve as basically a proto-Iron Man powered by the Cosmic Cube. Now, it does kind of annoy me a little bit, the implication that regardless of what happens, Steve gets to be a superhero, but Peggy doesn't. But again, I just feel like this is a byproduct of where the MCU is now versus back then, more than like the guy has to be a superhero thing, right? And I liked getting to see what Red Skull would have done to further his plans if he hadn't had the Cosmic Cube throughout the events of the movie, calling on a eldritch being of some kind for power instead. Literally, the only criticisms I have of this one are, one, because it covers the entire movie in a much shorter time. There's a lot of repeated dialogue that would have been spread out more and probably different because they would have had longer scenes in a full-length movie, but that's kind of crammed together here in the shortened time frame. And also, man, Sebastian Stan is not a good voice actor. I feel bad for saying it because I like the dude's performances and basically everything else, but he was not good here. Otherwise, this one's really great. This one is a mixed bag for me. I really love Chadwick Boseman's version of T'Challa, and I like Star-Lord to a point. Not super happy with his actor lately, but you know. So getting to see a version of T'Challa with the swagger of Star-Lord was pretty cool, and while it's not super clear what specific changes caused all of the differences in this version of T'Challa Star-Lord's universe, we did get to see characters who would reasonably be in the Guardians of the Galaxy setting doing stuff that we would never see them do in the movies, so that was pretty cool. Otherwise, I can kind of take or leave this one. It's fine, but not, I think, amazing. This one, a murder mystery with the Avengers as victims, is the only one of these that really challenges Episode 1, for me personally, as my favorite. I like this one a lot. I, like a lot of comic book fans, have sort of a morbid fascination with seeing how all of the strongest heroes in the worlds that I follow might be taken out if someone had the plan to take them out. And this is that kind of story. Someone is going around using very specific methods of murdering all of the Avengers, which sucks. Like, if this weren't a what-if story, I'd be very against this. And the fact that this is so interwoven with the other what-if stories and sort of shared universe does kind of bum me out a little bit, because it means there's more consequences to this than in just a straight one-shot, right? Because it looks like we might follow up with these worlds later on. But it's still fun to see. We get to see little snippets of each of these characters' movies as they're killed off by something. And that's the mystery. What is the something that can do all of these things? And it follows Natasha as she tries to solve the mystery, which is great. Natasha needs more stuff to do, and the answer to the mystery is genuinely satisfactory. I buy it completely, and it allowed us a chance to see a more, not literally comic accurate, but like spiritually comic accurate version of a character that we've seen in the MCU who doesn't feel like his comic counterpart to me at all. So that was a nice treat. This was just fun, and I can't really talk about it much more than that, because if I do, it'll spoil stuff. So watch it. This one is set in an alternate version of the Doctor Strange movie, where Doctor Strange started out as a nice person. He wasn't so full of himself, and he was dating his friend. I cannot remember her name. Christine. Her name is Christine. He was dating her instead of there just being, like, tension between them. And then she dies. And in this version of his story, that's the inciting incident that causes him to become Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme. It's a fixed event in this version of the universe, this version of the timeline, because he must become that thing. But he desperately wants to get her back. So, he pursues forbidden magics to try to subvert that fixed point in time so that he can save her life. And this one was cool in a lot of ways. It showed some of the more eldritchy stuff in the MCU again, and led to one of the cooler elements, I think, of the Season 1 finale. And the action was really good, because we do see in this one, again, these aren't literally separate universes, they're separate timelines branching off of the same greater universe. We see that a powerful enough sorcerer can cause two timelines to exist simultaneously, side by side, even to the point that they can interact with each other. I imagine it's super dangerous to do this, but it's possible. Just so long as the common elements aren't expected to mesh together too often, I guess. And this allows a movie-accurate version of Strange and this other Eldritch Strange to exist at the same time, and they fight, and it's really cool, and he's kind of a tragic figure. But it does bug me, because one, this simultaneous timelines thing does contradict some other stuff, or at least seemingly contradict some other stuff, in Loki in particular. but also because we know for a fact that Christine does not have to die for Strange to become Sorcerer Supreme. He could also lose his hands, too. So I thought the solution to this one would be that Strange would realize he can't save her and have all that time with her. But he can save her by turning himself into a dick who would push her away enough that she wouldn't be in the car with him when they got hit, and then she wouldn't die. And that would lead to the inception of the universe that we saw in his movie, where he was a dick at the start, and he damaged his hands instead. That's that kind of cause and effect thing that I talked about I really like with episode 1, but they don't do that here because they need the Eldritch version of Strange to still exist by the end of this for a later story. And I feel like that's a weakness of the episode. I feel like the episode would have been stronger if they hadn't needed to do that. But that's just my opinion. A lot of people like this one, and I don't begrudge them that. It's a good episode. I don't particularly like this one. Marvel Zombies has sort of a tongue-in-cheek tone to it, and they tried to capture that one in hyperspeed by making this one more a comedy than anything else, and I didn't feel like it worked. If you like Marvel Zombies, some of the imagery in this one might be cool for you, but I don't think you'll like the story that much. Honestly, it's only okay at best. This episode was super interesting, bringing together two characters in a setting that were canonically in that setting at the same time and yet just didn't meet, allowing Killmonger to save Tony from becoming Iron Man and sort of take on that role himself in a roundabout way, allowing him to bring his plans, as we saw in the Black Panther movie, to fruition in a completely different way, leading to a more successful version of Killmonger, I guess is the best way to put it, who has all of this additional knowledge from Tony and being exposed to Tony's resources and technology. But there are a couple elements of this one that I don't quite buy. It's really easy for him to pull off some of the stuff that he does, even with the trust and the knowledge and the resources that he has. I don't quite buy that some of these other characters would have been quite incompetent enough to be disposed of so easily. And it also kind of feels like, by the end of the season, that some of the choices made in the production of this episode were to allow this specific version of Killmonger to exist for the finale. Like the story of this one feels kind of incomplete to that effect. And I'm not sure I really like that about it. There's also some problematic elements to it that have been discussed online by people much more equipped to talk about them than I am. So I'm not going to get into that here, but it's something worth looking into if you're interested. Again, this one's one that's, I think, only kind of okay. Right? This is another one, kind of like episode 1, that has a very clear cause and effect to it. And actually, now that I think about this one, I probably like this one about as much as episode 3. It's probably up there too. In this one, Loki is returned to the Frost Giants instead of taken in by Odin, and therefore Thor and Loki don't play off of each other in the same way that they did in the main timeline. They still do play off of each other. They're still friends. They know each other. But they don't have the same kind of relationship, and therefore Thor isn't pushed into being the purely heroic figure that he is in the movies. He's even kind of further from that, but also sort of closer to that than he was in his first standalone movie. Specifically because of this change, you can understand why. He's more of a party prince in this one, and comes to Earth to throw a party while his dad's asleep and his mom's away. It's one of those sort of high school party movies where he can't get caught and has to clean everything up in time by the end. And he meets the girl and he gets to the girl, and there's cool action-y set pieces and comedy set pieces. There's a great fight between him and Carol that was fantastic. This one was a very low stakes, low consequences, super fun entry. But I think it's because it was so low stakes and low consequences that I don't place it at the top of the list. I don't rank it first, right? Like, I don't particularly like these to be super high consequences. Again, I've alluded a couple of times that I feel like connecting all of these for the end, for the season 1 finale, is kind of a weakness of the series. But I don't want it to be like super low consequences either, right? Everything just kind of works out in the end. And again, that's the kind of story this was lampooning. And there were some fantastic comedy moments in here. I want to stress that. I cannot stress that enough. This is a funny episode. And I wouldn't be opposed to seeing more of this specific universe. It seems like this version of Thor could grow into a very interesting person along similar but distinctly different lines to the real one, to the not the real one, the main series one. You get what I'm saying. Throughout all of these, just like the comics that they're based on, has been the through line of Uatu the Watcher, observing all of these disparate events. In What If Ultron 1, an alternate version of Ultron does manage to complete the Vision body for himself and take possession of it, and therefore defeats the Avengers and is therefore in complete control of the planet when Thanos comes and is able to beat Thanos and take the Infinity Stones. He becomes essentially a sapient AI version of the Infinity Gauntlet, completely unharmed by the recoil of the use of the stones' power. He seems slightly more limited in how he can use them. Like, you would imagine that something that powerful could just rewrite reality in its entirety. He doesn't do that, he just makes copies of himself. Maybe the fact that he's a robot kind of limits it. But he also seems like he can just draw on the stones as power batteries and do basically anything, even outside of his own reality, which is something that's not usually true of the stones. And so, of course, he takes over the world, and in part 1 of this episode, Clint and Natasha are trying to stop him. They're trying to get their hands on another AI that is incompatible enough with him, but powerful enough that it would be able to overwrite him and destroy him. Not going to spoil what AI that is, because it's pulled right out of the MCU and it makes perfect sense and it's pretty cool. But as they're doing this, Ultron is going around wrecking the universe, becoming more and more aware of things to the point that he becomes aware of the Watcher. And now the Watcher has made this thing aware of the multiverse. He has to own up to that, and so he brings together the Guardians of the Multiverse, plucking a bunch of characters from other realities that we've seen in other What If episodes to fight against Ultron and try to defeat him. That's T'Challa's Star-Lord, Captain Carter, Party Man Thor, a version of Gamora who was supposed to get her own episode but didn't because of time constraints brought about by the pandemic. Who am I missing? Natasha, eventually the one from Ultron's universe, Killmonger, and Eldritch Strange. I think that's everyone. And I like the concept of this. My main problem with these is, one, in this series where, at least for the most part, these were separate stories. They could have been even more separate than they actually were if they didn't have to prepare these characters for this. And I do feel like there was just enough of that in some of these previous episodes that it made them worse. It made them worse than they needed to be. Also, these 2 episodes should have been 5 episodes. There are so many character moment opportunities in just this second of the 2 episodes, the finale of the season, that they don't even allude to them, that we should have gotten. Because it's always been the little moments that make the MCU more than just action set pieces set to music. The character moments, sometimes they're a little off from how you feel the characters should be portrayed, but for the most part, those character moments are good, solid character work that make the stories of these movies and shows. And there were so many opportunities for them in just the second part of this episode. There were plenty of opportunities that they actually followed through on in the first part, so I'm not going to give that one a lot of crap. The second part of this one should have been expanded so they could have worked more of those in. What we got was fine. It was very action-packed. I liked the ending. I liked seeing just how far ahead the Watcher planned everything out. That was pretty stinking cool. But I feel like it could have been so much better. And so trying to connect these together too much, I feel, causes this season to kind of peter out a little bit. But not like a lot, not like a ton. It's still pretty good. Like, this is the most MCU movie-y of all of them. It's the one that feels most in line with how the movies tend to do things nowadays. Except for maybe Captain Carter, but not really, because that one was so much recreating an existing movie. So if you just like the movies as turn-off-your-brain popcorn film fodder, you'll definitely like this finale, right? But I just feel like it could have been more. I don't know. I will say, though, Infinity Ultron, genuinely an existentially terrifying villain, and this version of Ultron is pretty different than the one in the actual mainline comics. He's more of a nihilist than just a megalomaniac or whatever, right? So I can see this I'm going to destroy the entire multiverse because that's the only way to fulfill my mission of bringing about peace kind of mindset being like the logical extreme of that character's thought process. It makes sense. He is the best part of these 2 episodes, just because it is so terrifying that he wants to do so much evil, and he can. And it's not even really that hard. And the moment, I'm not going to go into detail about it, but there is a moment in this where he becomes aware of the Watcher, and it genuinely scared me. Like, the Watcher's reaction to it was perfect. Just a spectacular moment in this franchise. One of the top moments in this franchise, for sure. But they could have been better. And so this series, the one that I feel like had the least reason to kind of peters out by the end, but that's mostly because, again, the pandemic was a thing. Like, it's not as obvious here as it is in Cap and Bucky, but you can kind of tell that there were moments here where maybe there was supposed to be like 10 more minutes to some of these episodes, but they had to cut them back because they just didn't have the resources to get them done to completion in time. And that sucks. I'm hoping, though, going into the next season, that will stop being true. I can't imagine why it wouldn't. So hopefully it will stop being true, and we'll start to get slightly more definitive versions of these stories that they have planned to tell. And there are definitely a couple of realities here that I would like to see follow-ups of. So hopefully we'll get to see that too. I am bummed, though, especially with how much I liked the Black Widow movie, that they had an opportunity to give the main MCU its Natasha back, or at least a very similar version of her back. They didn't take it, and that kind of bummed me out. But I like what's her name? Her sister from the Black Widow movie. I really like her. And I think she'll make a good Black Widow once she comes around to being a Black Widow. So I'm looking forward to that too. It's fine either way. There's my review of Black Widow too. That one's really good, mostly because of her sister. Her sister's the best character in that movie. There you go. I reviewed like 20 MCU things in this one. So those of you who've been asking for MCU content, hopefully this will hold you off until I do my character study on Natasha, which is definitely coming. I'm super excited about it after seeing Black Widow. I like Black Widow a lot. That said, this has been, of course, a very super long episode of My 2 Cents, but in the end, that has been my 2 cents on the first season of Marvel's What If. As per usual, though, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of the series? What are your top 3 episodes, for example? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who think would enjoy my content, subscribe. If you haven't, you can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.